Hello everyone, this is Joanne and welcome. In this episode, I would love to share this small yet really fun quilting project. The finished measurement of this quilt is about 19 inches wide by 31 inches long. So it's gonna make a great wall hanging, or you can also use this as a table runner. Although you can absolutely change the size the way you want it to. You can make it wider or longer or rather narrower or smaller. So this is an improvised style quilt that performs a lot of curves. Now, if you remember the last quilting video that I shared, I also performed the curves or gentle curves. However, in that video, the method that I use is kind of the cheating method, which will only work if you use narrow strips, maximum 12 inches long, and very shallow curves. Now for this project, we will use different method, actually the proper method of doing curves. Now for the fabric, I actually use the jelly roll strips or the 2.5 inch strips. So I simply use half a strip for each panel. As you can see here, I play with a lot of colors and it's just so much fun. You can see all the contrast, all the shapes that taken place. I think this will go well also with more neutral tone or more earthy tone if that's the look that you want to go for. Or you can just go like two-tone contrasting color like black and white, black and white, black and white. I think it will go great as well. This is called improvised style quilt, so you can improvise the way you want it to. So feel free to play around with your fabric, see how you like it. So if you have any question, please don't hesitate to ask me in the comment section down below. And without further ado, let's get started. Prepare some 2.5 inch fabric strips. You can use jelly roll strips or you can cut from the yardage. You will need somewhere between 12 and 18 strips depending on how much color that you want to incorporate and how long do you want your wall hanging to be. Take one strip and then cut it in half. So if you're using jelly roll strip, simply cut through the fold line, set the other half aside. You can use that for later. And then don't forget to trim off the selvage ends as well. So you want to do the same with all the strips that you're going to use for this project. So each strip should end up measuring somewhere between 20 and 22 inches long. To start with, you're going to take two strips in contrasting color. Now take one strip, so I'm gonna take my blue strip here and then overlap that to the other strip, just like that. It doesn't really matter how wide of an overlap. I would say at least 1 inch of overlap. Now if your fabric has the right side and the wrong side, you should be looking at the right sides of both fabrics right now. So what we're going to do, we're going to cut in between this overlap. Now to make this demonstration easier to understand in case you are totally new in this technique, I'm going to mark the edges of my orange strip, the one underneath the blue strip that you can't see in the camera. I'm aligning the edges of my ruler with the edges of my orange strip and then mark it with my fabric marker. And then we're going to make the curve cut right in between the edges of the blue strip and the mark line, or the edges of the orange strip underneath the blue strip. So I'm going to take my rotary cutter and then make the curve cut. When you do this, don't think too much, simply wiggle your hand and make the curve. As long as you stay in between the overlap, you should be fine. Now I'm going to remove this blue strip from my left hand side. And then I'm going to remove this orange strip underneath. Alright, so both of your strips should be matching right now, just like puzzle pieces. Now go ahead and lay them right side together, just like that. And then I'm going to pop a few pins just to secure them in place. And you may see that the edges are not aligned, but that's how it should be. So what we're going to do next, we're going to sew them together with 1/4 inch of seam allowance. Now obviously we will need to align the edges together in order to sew this, and you want to do it just a little bit at a time. So I'm going to start from the top edges here. And then as you sew, you simply want to maneuver the upper strip to follow the shape of the lower strip. And if you get to the very curvy area, You may just want to do it a little bit at a time. So it may feel a little awkward at first, especially if this is your first time working with curves. However, just like everything else, you will need a little bit of practice, and once you get a hang of it, it's pretty easy. Once you've done sewing, go ahead and press towards one side. Alright, so this is how my first panel look like. Obviously yours will turn out different than mine. Alright, let me show you one more time. This time I'm going to sew this white strip to the fabric. So I'm doing pretty much the same thing as before, overlapping this white strip to the blue fabric, and then make the curve cut in between the overlap. Then I'm gonna remove the top left white strip and then the bottom blue strip. Lay them right side together, secure them in place with some pins, and then I'm gonna go ahead and sew them together pretty much the same like before with 1/4 inch of seam allowance. Alright, so you want to go ahead and build up your fabric by adding one strip at a time, repeating the same sequence. Alright, so here's my progress so far, looking much more interesting now as I've sewn more strips to the fabric. Next, I'm going to show you how to insert a very narrow strip. So here I've got a strip from the previous trimming, so if you've got something that is at least 1/2 inch wide, you can still incorporate it to the fabric. So I'm going to sew this narrow blue strip to the white strip. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to flip my fabric to the other side. So now I have my white strip on my left hand side. Then I'm going to lay my narrow blue strip on the white strip, just like that. Now as you can see, the blue strip is already curvy itself, since this was a product from trimming the very first panel, this blue right here. So what I'm going to do, when I make a cut, I'm simply going to follow the shape of the blue strip. So here I've got my rotary cutter, and I'm going to cut following the curve of the blue strip. Alright, now I'm gonna remove the bottom overlap, the white strip here. Then I'm gonna match the blue strip with the white strip. Then we're gonna lay them right side together, secure them in place with a couple of pins, and then sew with 1/4 inch of seam allowance. Here I've got mine already sewn and pressed, and when you press this, you want to press towards the wider strip. In this case, I'll press mine towards the white strip. Alright, now I'm going to take this purple strip, and then I'm going to sew this to the blue fabric. So what we're going to do, we're going to overlap this in a slight different way. So this time we will have the fabric or the blue strip to sit on top of the purple strip. Just like that. It doesn't really matter how much of an overlap. You can go narrow or wider. Alright, now we're going to take the rotary cutter and then make the cut along the blue strip. This time I really go shallow, super shallow curve, since I have very less fabric left, and I don't want to cut too much that I cut the white strip next to it. Alright, now I'm going to remove the excess blue fabric and the bottom purple fabric. Lay the purple strip on the blue strip right side together, pin them in place, and then sew with 1/4 inch of seam allowance. Alright, so here I've got mine already sewn and pressed, and you can see that narrow blue strip peeking through from the fabric. Just a little accent like this, I think, really adds more uniqueness and characteristic to the fabric. So I'm gonna go ahead and continue building my block and really just have fun. This is more on a spontaneous kind of piecing, hence they call this also free piecing. So feel free to express yourself, use as much as color as you want to. So keep sewing until you reach the length that you desire. Alright, here I've got my quilt top done. The length of my quilt top is now 32 inches long, and I'm pretty happy with that size. Now I recommend for you to use wider size strip for both ends of your fabric. This way you will have plenty of room to trim off the edges in case you need to straighten up your fabric. So what we're going to do next, we're going to square up this fabric. So I'm going to start by folding the fabric in half lengthwise, just like that, aligning the top and the bottom edges. And then I'm going to go ahead and trim off both sides. Alright, so here I've already trimmed my quilt top. So what I like to do next is to stay stitch along the side edges. Sew the edges with 1/4 inch of seam allowance, and I recommend to use your walking foot. This will help prevent the fabric from stretching during the quilting or the binding, since there are a lot of seams there and they're all on bias. Alright, so my quilt top is done and ready to go. Now I'm gonna go ahead and layer this with the quilt batting and the backing fabric. So I basted my quilt sandwich with the spray basting. Obviously you can baste yours according to your preferred basting method. Now it's time for quilting. So I started by quilting this with my walking foot. I simply echo the shape of the curve and stitch right along the edges of each strip. And then I fill in some of the wider panels with free motion quilting. So I did the pebbling, also loop to the loops, and some other easy design. Obviously feel free to do any kind of quilting method or any design that you desire. Once you've done quilting, go ahead and trim off all the excess batting and the excess backing, and then finish it up by adding binding and hanging sleeves as well. And that's all I have for you today, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and subscribe to this channel if you're not already so you won't miss any future uploads. And I shall see you next time with another fun sewing and quilting project. Goodbye!